Friends, a couple of months ago, you and I embarked on a journey to decipher the alphabet soup that is the Mercedes-Benz naming convention. We started with something called the GLA. Then we moved on to something that looked like an ML, but is now the GLE. Now we have something that used to be the GLK, but we've never seen it before. They tell me it's based on the C-Class, and you and I just drove the latest version of the C-Class. So let's see what happens when you cross a C with a GL. Shall we? So, engines! Well, that would be the wrong term. It is engine, at least in the good old US of A. We get anything we want as long as it is a 2-liter, 4-cylinder, direct-injected, turbocharged engine. It puts out 241 horsepower that comes in at 5,500 RPM and 273 pound-feet of torque, which is actually pretty fantastic from a 4-cylinder engine, especially when you consider that it comes in at 1,300 RPM. It is connected to a 9-speed transmission, yes, count them, 9 gears, that is wrapped in magnesium. Very fancy. Now, as cool as this is, if we're really reading the tea leaves correctly here, you and I both know there will be more engine choices here, especially when you consider how much room there is available if I stick my hand in here. I'm guessing there's definitely going to be a diesel, which you already get in Europe. And if memory serves me correctly, at the world premiere, there was a plug-in hybrid version there, so we'll probably see that at some point. And then if we're really good at Christmas this year, maybe, just maybe, there will be something that will be like V-shape, maybe 4 liters, and yes, a turbo, but perhaps 2 that sit here. But you know the old saying, a man, well, he can dream. So today, you and I are going to drive the 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo. Welcome to a very beautiful but also very rainy North Georgia. I don't know if you guys have been following the national, at least U.S. national news, but there was a major hurricane that came through and effectively put Texas underwater, almost shut down New Orleans, and wreaked havoc across the South. That is, of course, the time we are here. Normally, I fly to these events, but this time I caught a ride with an old guy with a beard, a lot of animals, and in a very large boat. But I digress. Now, normally rain would shut us down, but this is an all-wheel drive SUV, so it actually kind of works to our favor. So you and I still need to tend to the business of pulling power. Now, really, the math is what we got to look at here, kind of like we did in that GLE 450 episode. It's a good amount of horsepower, as we discussed, in pulling power, but it still has to pull at least 3,800 pounds, that's the 2-wheel drive, and 4,000 pounds for the car we're driving now. Okay, so you may be thinking that's indeed a lot of work for a 4-cylinder engine to be pulling around 4,000 pounds. But the headline here is, there's enough power. But really, Mercedes has taken out a bit of an insurance policy, and that's this dynamic control system we've talked about in other episodes. But here it's a bit different, in that it's got the Eco, Comfort, Sport, and Sport Plus, and they have the individual in this one as well, we've talked about so much recently. But what they do is they decouple the engine mapping, the steering mapping, the transmission mapping from the mapping of the dampers. So this is standard, this dynamic system is standard in all GLCs, but the air suspension, meaning the adjustment we talked about in that C400 last year and the C450 recently, that is optional. Okay, so let's try pulling power in practice. We're in comfort mode right now, the car is in 7th gear. Let's say I want to accelerate before I get to that turn. It's downshifted 2 gears, now quickly back up to 6, and you barely notice the gear shifts. So effectively, the transmission is a tool to pull more power out of a smaller engine in order to motivate 4,000 pounds. So it's unlike that GLE 450 that we drove. That has the same transmission, but that has a very different job. And actually, I'm not going to tell you what that job is in this film. Go and check out that GLE 450 Coupe episode, because that was a very unique application of this transmission. Anyway, let's try sport mode. And now what the car is doing, I don't want to call it the resting gear, but the gear that you're going to cruise in, now it's gone down from 7 to 6. And notice the car is running about 2,500 RPM as opposed to almost 2,000 in comfort. Then we move up to Sport Plus, and it's now down to 5th gear as a cruising gear. And notice you get like the infographic here where it tells you what's going on between the throttle mapping, the steering mapping, and the transmission mapping. Now, on a side with this dynamic system, it controls more than the engine, steering, and transmission mapping. It also controls the air conditioning system. So right now we're in Sport Plus mode. Let's go back down to Eco mode. And what it's done is the car now, it switches up to 5th gear going up a hill and around turns, and we're about 2,000 RPM. But it's told the air conditioning system to switch to a more economical operation, and that works in conjunction with the auto start function, which I know you guys were incredibly vocal in the C400 episode that you didn't like that. I personally like that feature, but it's these two things working in conjunction with each other that make this 4,000-pound vehicle get MPG into the 30s. Now, driving dynamics is a very funny thing because the bits you don't see have the biggest impact on the way your car drives. Like, for example, this is on offer in both 2-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive. In the 4-wheel drive, which this car is, 55% of the power goes here, 45% of the power goes here. Kind of the way you want it set up. But in our tech review film, we talked about how in the case where there's a traction loss, you can vary where the power goes. Now, in other recent episodes, we spent a lot of time talking about how the construction method of a vehicle affects driving dynamics, like that recent Kia episode from Colorado. This is really no exception. Mercedes-Benz uses a lot of different strengths of high-strength steel in the construction of this vehicle, but then in certain more strategic areas, like for example, like the lateral section which the dashboard hangs off of, that's all aluminum. And the logic is to save weight. And this actually replaces the GLK, which is a physically smaller vehicle, but this bigger vehicle weighs about 200 pounds less, which is not an inconsequential amount. It's like 5% of the weight of this vehicle. And then last but not least, you and I spent a lot of time talking about dynamic control in Mercedes in our recent episodes. This is no exception. However, how they put it together is a very big difference. And really to understand that, we need to take this back out onto the very wet roads of northern Georgia. So one of the biggest things that impacts the driving dynamics of your vehicle is its overall length. The longer a vehicle, the more supple it's going to ride. The shorter a vehicle, the more it's going to get disturbed by things like railroad crossings, broken pavement, and speed bumps. Now, of all the changes we've talked about here, the biggest change is an additional 5 inches in the length of this vehicle. Now, the GLK, you know, it was shorter, but it almost had characteristics of like a B-segment car because it got more disturbed by things like this. So we go over a speed bump in a GLK, it would almost like pick itself up and plant itself somewhere else. Where here, let's speed up a little bit. Please don't try this at home. And notice this doesn't pick itself up and plant itself somewhere else. So of all the things you get extra length, you improve your driving dynamics, but the biggest thing you get, and here's one more speed bump, is more control. Friends, a bit of an admission. I am broken. To me, the perfect car is one that has a leaky roof, generally leaves you on the side of the road at least 3 times a year, and was hand-assembled by 2 guys in a shed somewhere in the southeast of England. So you can imagine, cup holder size is not my thing. Well, being this is targeted to not me, we do have to talk about cup holder sizes, but I found a very unique way in which we arrive at cup holder sizes. The subwoofer. So in many episodes of Mercedes, like the S65, the S-Class, I talk about these stunning speaker grills, the Burmester speaker grills that I would love to use as art on my wall. Well, there is a subwoofer system in this vehicle that has been pilfered from the SL-Class, and that takes the subwoofer, and instead of having it in the door, it is here. And there is a logic that they did this. 2 things, actually. The bass resonates more through the structure of the vehicle, thus basically shaking your intestines out. And then number 2, if you want to have like a big gulp or like whatever the biggest like chai, expensive latte, frappuccino, pumpkin, pansy drink you people drink, you can fit it in here, and then you can fit it in here, because it's like, I think 30% bigger in these things here. Then there's actually more space in the glove box and the center console, because now you have more space because you took all of the audio stuff and moved it forward. Get it? We're going on a very long driveway to get to a winery to have lunch here. which is frankly where you would find vehicles like this, not so much fjording the rivers of flooded North Georgia. And that's kind of interesting really to think about, because this is an incredibly capable vehicle. Like, you and I could probably do some serious off-roading in this thing, but really most owners are going to be going to places like this on like romantic weekend getaways, taking the kids to like soccer practice, piano recital. That's effectively what these things are relegated to, sadly. And I don't know if the engineers make cars like this because they know they're going to suburban duty, or they make cars like this and design in like engineering prowess, and it could do it if you want it, because they know it's like the Vince Lombardi thing. You know you've had a successful day on the battlefield, not so much the battlefield, but the ball field, when you fall on the ground, dead tired from exhaustion, not because you've been beaten, but because you busted your ass, you did the best you could, and you know what? The best you could won the day, which is kind of what the engineers of cars like these do, because they're busting their ass saying their cars can fjord rivers like 3 feet tall, or whatever this thing can do, when they know it's going to places like this. So maybe I should reword this into, what do Mercedes engineers and Vince Lombardi have in common? Not that I'm a sports guy. So in summary, what do we got? Well, we got a very fancy turbocharger. We got this cool air suspension, but not on this one. We got this whiz-bang dynamic control system, but all of that matters not when you add 5 inches of length to your vehicle. It not only transforms the way it looks, it transforms the way it drives, which is now why you and I need to start taking this seriously. And with that, I need to leave you guys with a question. Actually, in our GLC world premiere film, I left you guys with a question of, what do you think this now competes with? And you guys were kind of all over the map. You were like, well, in some cases it was the Lexus RX, but in other cases it was Lexus NX, or it was the BMW X3 or the BMW X5, but you were pretty clear it is direct competition with the Audi Q5. So with that, my question is this. Would you choose this new GLC 300 or the Audi Q5 or the Lexus RX? And for good measure, we can even throw in the Lexus NX. But don't just tell me which one you would choose, tell me why you would choose it and what region of the world you live in. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, Motoman TV all one word, Motoman TV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And on that note, I want to leave you with 2 things. Number 1, a friendly reminder that you can now download us, our very own brand new app, on the Apple iTunes Store for your iOS device, and for you Android users out there from Google Play, it is free for the download on both. And then perhaps a bit of a hint-vice of what is coming up. In December, you and I are going to be driving maybe a derivation of this. I can't quite tell you what it is. All I'm going to say is make sure you check back in December for something entirely new, but not totally unrelated to the GLC 300. Until December, bis später.